This is Planet Poet, Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and thank you so much for being with me today. It's my great pleasure to welcome my in-studio guest, poet, translator, visual artist, and poet laureate of Delaware County, New York, Bertha Rogers, to the show to discuss her new work, Uncommon Creatures, the Anglo-Saxon Riddle-Poems from the Exeter book, which she illuminated and translated, and her latest collection of poetry, Wild Again, out this year from Salmonpoetry. Hi, Bertha.
Hi.
Great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Bertha Rogers is a poet, translator, visual artist, and teaching artist. Several hundreds of her poems appear in literary journals, anthologies, and in her poetry collections, including Wild Again, Heart Turned Back, Sleeper, You Wake, Even the Hemlock, A House of Corners, and The Fourth Beast. Her poems have received 8 nominations for the Pushcart Prize. Her translation of the Anglo-Saxon epic poem Beowulf was published in 2000, and her translation of the Anglo-Saxon Riddle-Poems from the 1,000-year-old Exeter book, Uncommon Creatures, was published in 2019. In 1992, with her late husband, Ernest M. Fishman, she founded Bright Hill Press and Literary Center of the Catskills. In 2017, she was commended for her work with Bright Hill in the Congressional Record. She retired as executive director in 2017 and now leads the Bright Hill Youth Workshops and serves as editor-in-chief for the poetry series. And, as I said, she serves as poet laureate of Delaware County. And you've been very busy this year,
Yes.
Bertha.
Yes, indeed.
You have. And you have 2 books out. We're going to talk first about the book that's based on 1,000-year-old riddles called Uncommon Creatures. And could you talk about would you talk about the history of the project, Bertha?
Well, I started, I had translated Beowulf and published that in 2000. And when I was all done with that, I found I was really missing Anglo-Saxon. So I decided to do the 95 riddles from the Exeter book. And it took me a long time, 10, 12 years, something like that. And then I decided that I would have illuminations with them because 1,000 years ago there weren't printing presses, and when the monks translated or worked on a Bible, for instance, there was only one copy, and they used illustrations, illuminations in the sides, and they used gold leaf. And I really like that technique. And so I decided to do it for myself.
The work is very beautiful. It's radio, can't really show it to you. But I've seen Bertha's work in the past, and you do use gold leaf beautifully throughout your work. I think it's I don't know if you would say it's a theme or an artistic consistency that you have with that.
There's something about working with gold leaf. It's really, it enhances the other work. It's, I wouldn't, although it was used in religious text, I wouldn't say it's necessarily religious, but it gives another dimension to the work, I think.
Well, it adds a luminosity. It actually glows. Yeah. And there is a distinction, would you say, between illustration and illumination?
Well, I think illustration basically describes visually describes the words of, say, a text. Illumination, I see that as a combined process. Today, I think the people who are most successful at illumination, and they wouldn't necessarily call it that, but are some of the children's books that are being published. They're stunningly beautiful. But those are called illustrations. But the illumination, I think it illuminates what's said in a different way than illustrating.
Yeah, it's hard to describe, but it sort of pierces through the meaning a little bit more directly, perhaps.
Yes.
And the history of the riddles, you had compared when I spoke to you earlier, the monks gathering the riddles from the people in Exeter, I guess, correct?
Right. In that surrounding countryside. Yes, the people were illiterate, and so theirs was an oral tradition. And it's my understanding that the monks gathered up the riddles, wrote them down, and they ended up in the cathedral. Bishop Leofric bequeathed them to Exeter Cathedral in 1072, the book of them.
And they're secular, right?
Many are.
Yeah, yeah.
There are also some religious ones. There are quite a lot about the weather and about the formation of the world, as in, say, Genesis. But there are a lot that are also secular. There are a lot that deal with common household objects that you would recognize today.
And you had compared the gathering of these riddles and the writing them down to the Grimm's brothers.
Right. That's my assumption, that it was a similar project. And I like to think of the monks having a great time with them.
Yeah, you always think of it, the monks in excuse me, in the Middle Ages, as the guardians of our culture, of the great works, and
right.
But it's also the common works, if
right.
you will.
There are lots of jokes among the riddles.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Well, I would love you to read a riddle for us.
Okay.
How would you? Could you read it first? Want you tell? Do you want to give away? Don't give away what the riddle is. We'll get the riddle first, right?
Okay. I'll read just a few lines of it in the Anglo-Saxon first, and then I'll read it, and then you'll have to guess. Mec jeseta soda niwara walden, Christa campe oft exquisite berna, onrimasin eroan yetasen, ned midura swa ihim nobrina. So that is the beginning of this riddle. He who signifies victories, the Christ, made me to make war. Often I burn living souls on Middle Earth, terrorize them without touching bodies when the Lord rabbles me to fight foes. Sometimes I make light the thoughts in myriad hearts, gentle those I before opposed. Then they are warm, blessed, as when they were burnt, or when through force and great sadness I again am their grace at their leave-taking.
Oh, that's beautiful. I have no idea what that is.
That's the sun.
The sun.
Yeah.
The sun. Could you read that? I'm sorry, could you read it again?
Sure.
Thank you.
He who signifies victories, the Christ, made me to make war. Often I burn living souls on Middle Earth, terrorize them without touching bodies when the Lord rabbles me to fight foes. Sometimes I make light the thoughts in myriad hearts, gentle those I before opposed. Then they are warm, blessed, as when they were burnt, or when through force and great sadness I again am their grace at their leave-taking.
It's the sun.
Yeah, and it probably, the original versions of these probably didn't have any reference to religion. Though that would have come in later, I'm assuming.
It's a very complex persona.
Yeah.
Destructive and warm.
Yeah. These people were masters of metaphor.
Yes, that's and the rhythm of the Old English you had mentioned. How did you come upon Old English?
Well, I had some in school, but in the mid-'80s, I think it was, a friend asked me to rewrite Beowulf for a performance. It was a theater performance. And I decided, after studying quite a bit, that I would rather retranslate it. So
you didn't like the translation.
There's so many, and I thought I could do a good job. So And I wanted to get the rhythm right because there are like 3 translations of Beowulf every year. And so that wasn't a question really, but I thought the rhythm was the most important thing. So I used to listen to Kemp Malone, who was a great Beowulf scholar, reading Beowulf in the original Anglo-Saxon. He recorded that for Caedmon recording, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore.
And Caedmon was the original English poet.
He was the one, Caedmon's song.
Yeah, I heard about him when my husband and I went to Whitby, which
Yes.
is also the home of Dracula.
Yes, yeah.
Bram Stoker wrote Dracula in Whitby. But
That's right.
It was in this funny little bookstore, and this book said, Caedmon, you must have this. And he gave me one of the book on Caedmon, and then we went up the the huge staircase to the Caedmon's monument. It was wonderful.
He was illiterate. He was a shepherd, and one day he burst forth.
He had an epiphany.
Yeah. Yes, he did.
The angels talked to him.
Yes.
Correct? He was never the same after that. Bertha, translating, we've talked about on and off. I've talked with other poets who've translated. It's such an elusive art, such an elusive thing to do.
Yeah.
What's the easiest and the most difficult things about translation?
Well, first of all, I think there are two main schools of translation. And one is that when you take on a translating project, you give yourself over to the original writer and you try to do the best you can for the original writer. The other one is that it's yours and you can do whatever you want with it. I belong to the first school of that you really owe it to that first writer to do the very best you can, the most honest translation.
And with the rhythm being so important, do you paraphrase sometimes to get the rhythms correct?
Well, yeah, and if you translated exact word for word, it really wouldn't make much sense. It doesn't make much sense, and that goes for translation of basically any language.
Yes.
So you have to take some liberties, I would say, while trying to be true to it.
Right, in order to get the essence of
Right.
what the original
Right.
was about.
Yeah.
That's the art.
Yeah.
That's the art of that. This is Planet Poet, Words in Space, an edition of The Writer's Voice at WIOX at 91.3 FM and MTC Cable, Channel 20. I'm Sharon Israel, your host, and joining me in the studio today is poet Bertha Rogers. Bertha, since we've been talking about Beowulf, would you read a little bit from your translation of Beowulf? And before I do that, you have a comment on Beowulf by James, the poet James Merrill. Thanks to you, and no doubt to the old bard or bards, I see what a powerful and splendid poem Beowulf is. When I came to those sea beasts sunning themselves on the ledges, I gasped with wonder. Your verse treads a nice line between the strict old measure and something looser. Congratulations. That was beautiful.
That was wonderful. Yeah.
So here's Bertha Rogers reading from her translation of Beowulf.
So I'm going to read a little bit here where Hrothgar, the king of Denmark, is congratulating Beowulf on killing the monster. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of that, and I'll read part of it in the Anglo-Saxon. Hrothgar malerod helmskildinge, nei frenthu after Salem sore is jena wod, denne je leodem. Dead is Escherah, Ermenlaf's elder brother, my rune reader, my chief counselor, the man who stood at my shoulder in war defense, at the front when our armies fought, our boar crests were attacked. So should all be, always good as Escherah was. It's one of my favorite passages.
My rune reader.
Yeah.
That sort of places it beautiful. And the story of Beowulf, could you just give us a little synopsis for those who
Yeah,
haven't read it.
Beowulf was a young man in Geatland, which is sort of southern Sweden, and he heard that in Denmark there was a monster terrorizing the Danes, and he was famous for bragging. But the thing about Beowulf was everything he bragged about, he accomplished. So he decided to cross the sea with his young friends, and they came to Denmark and said they'd take care of Grendel.
Grendel, yes.
And nobody could before. So they ended up, Beowulf killed Grendel. But then there's a kicker here. They didn't know that Grendel had a mom. I always call her Grendel's mom. And she came to avenge her son. So she avenged her son, and they killed her. And then many years pass, and Beowulf becomes the king of his country. But there's one last trial. You know, there are always 3 or 7. And he had to take out the dragon that was destroying their land. And in that terrible fight, he and the dragon were both killed. So that's basically the story.
Wow.
A really wonderful, I fell in love with
Such
Beowulf.
passion.
Yes.
It's really so alive and so immediate.
Yes.
And when I was listening to the Old English, it reminds me of sort of listening to English if you're not an English speaker. You know, you hear it, but you don't quite know what you're listening to.
Yeah. Well, Old English or Anglo-Saxon is a Germanic language. And so that is the foundation of our language, our English, our modern English.
Going back to the riddle book, your thoughts on combining art and poetry, which you do, I won't say equally beautifully. I mean, I think so. But to combine 2 art forms in one work, do you find yourself concentrating more on one? How do you separate the tasks?
Well, this was, in this instance, with the riddles, the text came first. The translations came first. Sometimes when I'm working with text and image, it's the other way, that the image first. But in this one, it's almost always the text first.
And when you're writing the translation, do you get images in your head?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. And I might make a note or put it aside or start a sketch at that time.
Would you read us another riddle?
Yes, I'll read. Well, I won't tell you what it is till I'm done. Okay. I am a warrior with a white throat. My head and sides are tawny. 2 ears tower above my eyes. My back and cheeks are bristle-barbed. My gait is fleet, my winged flanks. I easily thread on my fighting feet green staves. Yet I sing a stricken song when the death hound comes sniffing my scant home. Then I hide my children, and we bide in a love circle while doom seeks our covert door. It moves above our trembling heads. That death bringer, fearful and foul, wishes to fetch us all yawping to our slaughter. So handing and footing it, I gather my brood, swiftly secure a secret way out of the steep slope into the light, where I scurry my dear urchins from hurt's intent. Free of my babes, I am a fortress against death. He may scent me on narrow paths, but I will turn, whirling, tooth and claw, battle-slipping that frenzied creature, the slay stroke, severing through touch and grip his hated neck. Through hill's roof I will stay the course, fighting to the last. It is then I will see the whites of his eyes. And that is the fox.
The fox.
And you notice there's a lot of alliteration.
Yes, there is. Bristle-barbed,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. Again, the translation really gives you the feel of the old language.
I'm so glad.
Oh, yes, and the way it's on the page, too. I guess in the Anglo-Saxon, is sort of a caesura, the big pause in the middle between two sections of it, and you
Right.
keep that going. Is it written? It's written like that.
Yes, yes.
And the illustrations, I am a warrior, the white throat, and then you see the foxes, very beautiful, deep colors, almost like stained glass windows.
Yes.
In a way. How about one more?
Okay. Let's see. Okay, this is something that people around Roxbury would recognize. Maybe not easily, but
Can you give me the number?
it's number 21.
Okay.
My nose to the ground, I service a need. Grunting at the cave I've made, I am slave to my leader, hoary forest enemy. My master unjust, dangerous. Toward him I go, feeding my tongue. I strive, and I am pushed down. He sows his seed. Crafted of branches, I live for the ground. I'm bound by magicians, carried by wheels. I am strange. While I grovel, one edge of my path gathers green, while the other is richly black. A sharp sword thrusts through my spine and stomach, and a dagger tooth is shoved into my head. What I knife falls, curving death to one side, if my enslaver pushes me well. And that is a plow.
It's an implement.
Yes.
And the illustration is of a beast.
Yes.
With the knives, the swords in
Yeah.
his gray beast. Can you explain that a little bit more?
The riddle, or
Well, yeah, the beast of the plow.
right. So what happens with these riddles is that they really are persona pieces.
Right. Yes.
So they many of them are in the first person. So when you do that, when you're translating something like that, you think of the implement as if it were a person.
Yes.
And
yes.
he's describing himself, what he does for a living, what he looks like, what he does. I like that part where one edge of my path gathers green while the other is richly black. And if you've seen a plow operating, you see how it scoops that whole to the side. So it's really, they're very colorful.
Yes, it's a very stunning thing that an object would be personified like.
Yes.
It's very modern. Patricia Smith does that.
Right.
When she was talking about a lynching, and she told the poem was told from the point of view of the rope.
Yes. Well,
know.
there's this whole thing about sentient beings and non-sentient
Yes.
beings, and it also has to do, I think, with that human thing, dominion over. But we're all made of molecules, even
Yes,
a plow,
yes.
even a rock. Things just move much more slowly.
Yes.
So I think it's easy for me to understand a plow speaking.
Yes.
And so, when I'm teaching, I try to teach the kids respect and reverence for everything.
It's like the Gaia principle of the
Yeah,
earth.
right.
But it's also as a poet, it's very liberating because you can
Yeah.
infuse whatever you want with life,
Right.
and talk about
Right.
it that way. I want to read a comment, blurb by Helene Cardona, poet and translator, author of Life in Suspension, about Uncommon Creatures, which is the name of the riddle book. Uncommon Creatures is a tour de force, riveting translation by Bertha Rogers of all 95 Anglo-Saxon riddles rendered in alliterative verse that feeds on sound. Beautifully illuminated by Rogers, these riddles will enchant and delight the reader with their mystery and wonder. And for me, the illustrations themselves add greatly to the mystery. They clarify and add to the mystery at the same time, if that
Thank
makes
you.
any sense. I think we have a few more minutes. I would love to hear another riddle.
Okay.
Thank you.
This one's a really short one. It's number 45.
Okay.
I heard of a thing that grows in the dark. It breathes, blows from within, lifts up its hat. There was a bride girl who boldly lay hold of that body without bones. She cradled it, handled it. That daughter of a prince blanketed the wheezing creature with her own coat.
That is?
It's bread dough.
Bread dough. But the illustration is of a bat.
I know.
This very friendly-looking bat.
Yeah.
With lovely ears.
Well, that's the thing that grows in the dark, right? And she cradled it. There's a cradle in the illustration. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Right?
And there's the text.
Right.
Oh, that's great.
It's very funny, too, because, of course, there's a double meaning there.
Tell us.
Well, it's
yeah.
pretty,
Okay.
I don't need to tell you.
Right, the bat and whatever.
Right.
And
The body without bones.
yes. Thank you. And this is in black and white, this illustration.
Some of them
This
are, yes.
illumination.
That's actually a solar print. There are several solar prints in the book.
What is a solar print?
A solar print is like a lithograph, and it's made by drawing on glass or like a polymer-coated plate, and then it's exposed to the sun. And the inks are all water-based. There's no toxic, as with a lot of etchings and all. So the inks are all water-based, and you expose it to the sun a certain amount of time, and then you print it. Yeah.
So use different techniques for these works?
Yes. Some of them, there are drawings, pen and ink, black and white drawings, watercolors, acrylics, many different techniques. Yeah.
Fascinating. And this is Planet Poet, Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel. I'm here with poet, translator, visual artist, poet laureate of Delaware County. She's blushing. I'm kidding. Poet laureate of Delaware County, Bertha Rogers. And joining us now by phone from Manhattan is Planet Poet's Poet at Large, award-winning poet and visual artist, Pamela Monche Pierce, to share the latest poetry news and her own discoveries and revelations from the poetry world. Pamela will soon participate in a series, Finding Your Voice and Your Duende, Poems of Love and Death, led by poet and translator Sarah Arvio at Poets House. Hello, Pamela.
Good afternoon, Sharon, and hello, Bertha.
Hi, Pamela. Nice to meet you.
I'm enjoying this so much, and I always like to comment on the in-studio poet, and I have so many things to comment on, Bertha. I also make art. I primarily make collages, and I have been working with gold leaf for about a year and a half now.
Oh, really?
And I positively love it. And as both of you were talking about it, I think that there's also not only is it so warm and fabulous as to look at, but that there are so many unconscious messages that we get from gold, which we get from no other metal. I mean, I've worked with all sorts of other metals, but gold is just has such a history, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so it's a very special metal. So thank you for reminding me of that, and all the little fragments of this like gold dust that's all over the place that clings to everything. And it's wonderful to work with.
And burnished gold. It sort of leads into duende, I would think.
It leads into duende. Also, these poems, it's as if I've never heard anything of Beowulf before. And
yes.
I'm really, the passion in them, the intensity of them is absolutely remarkable.
And the immediacy, right? The immediacy.
Yeah, all of it, so fresh. And what I'm going to talk about is a perfect segue because I'm going to talk about my interest in Federico Garcia Lorca and his essay on Duende, Theory and Divertissement, his ideas about what I call passion and this intensity of feeling in poetry. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. This is triggered off, as Sharon said going in, that I'm going to be in this series with Sarah Arvio down at Poets House, and what they're talking about. Is duende a muse or is it inspiration? Is it the same as voice? And, we're going to talk about how we can access experiences and emotions such as dream thinking and thought streaming to capitalize on these ideas of Lorca. And, of course, Sarah is really the preeminent, she's a wonderful poet and preeminent translator from the Spanish, and just did a very highly regarded book about Lorca called Poet in Spain. So so duende is in the air, and I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs from Lorca's essay to kick this off, and this is in his essay. The black sounds are the mystery, the roots that probe through the mire that we all know of and do not understand, but what furnishes us with whatever is sustaining in art. Black sounds and mysterious power that all may feel and no philosophy can explain. And then he talks about all the arts are capable of duende, but it naturally achieves its widest play in the fields of music, dance, and the spoken poem, since these require a living presence to interpret them, because they are forms that grow and decline perpetually and raise their contours on the precise present. So I think what Bertha has just read is amazing, isn't it?
Yes.
And the different time periods.
Mm-hmm. The amazing duende in the object, the persona, and the fact that art has been described, a painting has been described as a silent poem.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
And there are many artists who are poets, and vice versa. Many poets who are artists.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, lots of that. And, I wanted to, Sharon and I talk all the time about poetry, and it's very interesting to me, and it's been part of our discussions that, right now there is an interest in duende, which I find fascinating at a time when poetry seems to be kind of cool and crafty and research-driven and form-oriented, and that feeling that, that inspiring state of heightened emotion doesn't seem to be in a lot of modern American poetry.
I think I'd agree. I was introduced to duende back in the early 80s by reading Robert Bly and the leaping poetry. And of course the Spanish poets. Nobody does it as well as the Spanish poets.
They don't
right?
leap nobody leaps as well.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
That's funny. I just have the book. I just got his book, Leaping Poetry. I had it on my nightstand.
Yeah.
And I think Robert Bly is certainly a wonderful proponent of this, and back in the 80s, I found a wonderful poem. There are many wonderful poems by Lorca himself, and this is translated by Paul Archer, and it's from his Lorca's Sonnets of Dark Love. But I think that this is a perfect example of what we're talking about. So I'm going to read it.
Great.
It's called Sonnet of the Garland of Roses. A garland, quick, I'm dying. Weave it now. Sing and moan and sing. For shadows my throat are clouding, and again the January light comes in. Trembling bushes and the air of stars lie between your love and mine. A dense mass of anemones picks up an entire year with a muffled moan. Revel in the open country of my wound. Break apart its reeds and delicate rivulets. Drink from my thigh my pouring blood. Be quick, and then together entwined with love-broken mouths and frayed souls, time will find us utterly destroyed.
Oh,
that's
wonderful.
My goodness.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Yes.
Pamela,
And sorry, go ahead, Sharon.
What's the name of that again?
Sonnet of the Garland of Roses.
Oh.
And it's translated by Paul Archer. And as I was reading all of this, one of the comments certainly about Lorca's poetry is that you can never turn his poetry into English, that it's really, really tough but I think Paul Archer did a great job. I do too. I think it's palpitating right off the page.
One of my favorites of his is Green, I Want You Green.
I love that one too.
It's incredible.
That's a good choice, Bertha. Yeah. Good choice. It's a good choice. So as I'm wandering through the Duende landscape, what is happening in my life, in addition to going to this series at Poets House, is I have brought my novella, The Red Couch, which is a highly charged romantic story of obsession. I brought it out of the drawer, and I'm working on it with an editor mentor in the UK to see if I can retool this and finally get it published. So I'm going to read a couple. It looks like poetry, and it acts like poetry, so I'm going to read a couple of little vignettes from it, all right?
Okay. Wonderful. Go ahead.
Okay, this is a female protagonist. She fashioned a coffin for her heart, made it from the soles of his shoes, his wallet, eyeglass case, lined it with one of his linen handkerchiefs, lowered it deep into her chest on ropes woven from his hair. The second one, to die of love. Her heart grew larger, harder, heavier. It weighed against her lungs. It filled her chest, pressed back against the bones of her spine. She could hear them being crushed as she lay awake. Breathing was impossible. She gasped for air. And the third one, into a satin pillowcase, she placed the candles from the bedroom, a swatch from the red couch, his mateless leather glove, her red lipstick, his toothbrush and razor, shaving soap and comb, locks of his hair, clips of her fingernails, the demitasse spoon he used to feed her, the sash from his black silk robe, a toss of black confetti, little X's, kisses cut from his many romantic emails, a packet of forget-me-not seeds, a lump of hashish. So that's what I have for you today.
Lots of duende. That's duende-ridden. Gorgeous stuff.
For sure.
Oh, my goodness.
so.
Wonderful. I can't wait to see the whole book.
Well, I
When
have
you
to get
finish
to
with
work
it.
on that.
But-
Well, I have to get to work with that on it.
But
So
it's also so interesting. It's the power of the object. You transform objects
exactly.
into objects. That what Nick Flynn calls cathexis. You
Yes.
know, with the and I find it fascinating. Pamela, you've done it again. You've hit a home run in the poetry world on the
well, I
air, the
love every
poetry
minute on the show.
airwaves.
All right.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to become a listener. With great pleasure, I will become a listener. And goodbye, Bertha, and goodbye, Sharon, and have a wonderful time.
Thank
You
you so
too.
much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Oh, and Bertha, we're back to. I hate to leave the riddle book behind, but we have more treasures ahead with your new collection. I mean, this is in 1 year, correct?
Yes, yes.
A full collection of poems called Wild Again, published by Salmonpoetry. They could be considered persona poems, but I want to read comments by Lynn McGee, author of Bonanza, Heirloom Bulldog, and Sober Cooking, about this collection. Wild Again's first poem opens with these words, "Once I was part of a holy beast," and the thrilling audacity of that assertion, the claim of having both a divine and inhuman heritage, opens wide the parameters of what a poetic bestiary might be. These aren't persona poems. These are poems of embodiment. That's a gorgeous blurb. It's also very true about these poems. Could you comment a little bit? I know it's hard to comment on what somebody else is saying about your work, but about persona poems and that embodiment.
I think some of these persona pieces, I hardly know where they came from, and they come out of nowhere in a way. But that's not to say that they're not revised and edited considerably. Right. So maybe there's a line that you get or that I get, and that becomes part of that whole thing. So, and I live with dogs, cats. I've always lived with dogs. So I have a close relationship with them, and a relationship, I would say, that it's not that they're pets, it's that they're companions. And so I think that's part of that, trying to understand them and I live on a little mountain. I see a lot of hawks, birds, and so when I watch them, I'm trying to pay attention to what their life might be like. I won't say what they're thinking because I have no idea, but what their life might be like. And if a hawk swoops down and catches a little animal, then I'm thinking what's that like for the animal, for the hawk, etc.
For both
Yes,
involved. It was very Pythagorean, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's where you live, too, of course. You
Yes.
live in the Catskills, and I guess it's sort of an organic relationship.
I think so,
Within,
yes.
within your house, the animals in your house, and what's outside your immediate
Right.
environment.
Right.
So let's get to the book.
Okay.
It's up to you, whatever you'd like to read.
Okay,
Let's
I'll
go.
read that poem, Holy Beast, first.
Yes.
It's the first poem in the book.
Yes.
Once I was part of a holy beast, I was. I was a dog, a bear, a horse. I was the leader and the dragging lead. My fur was both sleek and shaggy, black and white. I was as tall as a stallion, long-maned, yet bony, as deep-withered as a dog. I barked and I whinnied, I growled, I cantered and I loped, I lumbered. This was before I was born, before I slid from the cave, where I was hailed then demeaned for my unnatural cries. I rose up, red dog spinning rein, swirling hand of pink. At last they knew me in my corner. The words they gave left. I barked again.
That's Bertha Rogers reading the first poem, Holy Beast, in her new collection, Wild Again. So it ends off as a dog, but it's sort of incorporates all beasts.
Right.
In a sense.
Yeah. So, and then I have, I've been thinking about bears for many years, and I've met them on hiking, and I just recently had a giant black bear visit my place.
Lovely.
Yeah. It's very exciting. That's under the statement, be careful what you wish for. So I'd like to read this poem, To the Heart.
Please.
I have taken up residence in the bear's black body. The bear's heart has devoured mine. I, all my thumping, am diminished. And the bear grows bigger. His seething face has absorbed all the day's light. His clawed paws are as turbulent as electricity at night. Heart, the sunflowers have been extinguished by hurled rays, and I am dead to the day. They told me I would discover morning, but here it is always night, though the walls be red and flowing. Blood moves, genome smart, but knowing not of itself, all its bodies sequenced and thwarted, though paginated, booked and shelved. The bear refuses to read the pages I was, spits me out. The blinded blinds move like flattened smiles in air's carried currents. Crows pick out, lay down words between light's molten lines. Never forget you. Never forget your thronged face, they cry. The bear is silent, his viral eyes red hot.
That's beautifully read,
Thank you.
Bertha. Thank you. So you're an intellectual swallowed by the bear.
Yeah, I
No
guess.
less.
Yeah.
The two sides of life.
Right.
And I love the way the bear refused to read the pages I was and spits me out. Every time I see sunflowers, I think of Blake. And,
Yeah.
Sunflowers. But this has that kind of thumping, let's say.
Well, thank you.
That would say. But the bear, have taken up residence in the bear's black body, because the bear is so huge, and I guess he came to visit you to talk about your poem.
He must have.
Oh my goodness. So another, please.
Okay. This one is called Stone and Stand.
Okay.
First I was mountain, one among many, our shoulders shoved up, rough. We jostled and pushed, seeking blue. We grew meager from the ceaseless budding, our borders rupturing, rounding down to stippled smallness. Then I was stone, alone. I stood in a green field below a flimsy sky. I was hugely still. There was quiet around, within, just air and I. In time, faces with voices showed, limbs, hands, grunting, they hoisted my bulk. I said nothing, pondered where they would at last set me down. They broke me. They piled me up with my kind. Now we rest together, screened by trees who seated themselves in our abraded bodies, thin skin. Those high, shifting limbs, ours, too. We are become a host, yet one, rooted, riveted. Fingered arms sign our big thoughts in air, but we hold. Stillness is our wary way. We are grove, and we slowly think, slow we go, back, from stand to range.
It's Bertha Rogers reading her poem, Stone and Stand. And that goes back to what you were saying before about the energy inherent in objects.
Yeah.
In the stone itself, and how it's manipulated. It's almost a victim. Stone is victim. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But first I was a mountain, then I was stone alone. I liked the fact that the stone was hugely still, and it's sort of a journey poem.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Well, I for many years I've studied the stone circles, and in fact I did a lot of walking in England to the various stone circles, and I was completely compelled by those. And of course I know they were placed there by humans, but if you've ever been to a stone circle, the enormous silence, these huge stones just standing there, and not just Stonehenge, but the others as well. So that's basically, I have a whole series of paintings about the stone circles too.
It's time for a new exhibit. Have you exhibited those?
Yes,
as a group?
some of them, yes. Yeah.
You inspire me to go home and write about my trees and my stones, and I find it very comforting to do that. Also,
Yes.
it sort of gets you really out of yourself, literally,
Right.
and out of the human. But there's great compassion in that poem.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. And we have time for, this is a treat. We have time for a couple of more.
Okay. I'll read one about copper beech trees in winter. And we have a lot of the beech trees around here. They're those beautiful trees with the leaves that in winter are coppery, and they hang on. So this is about that. Leaves arc like paintings of blown leaves, like cut paper, like sunset strewn across red gold sky, like smoldering fires, serrate-edged, notched, like some knives, but they cut only the hard wind, the wind that tries to bridge them. Wind can't. These trees are too feisty. They do not hide in riches or ditches. They flaunt, they claim rough edges. Farmers name beeches weeds. They push through field soil. Their roots patiently wait, shove worker-laid stones, open faces. December disrupts, beats black branches, feathered, fingered twigs. They're like pens writing winter's aggregate history. Black barriers, hinged nodes above snow, hanging on against blizzard breath, hanging on all the scarred, bleak season.
copper beech trees in winter. It conveys the harshness of winter. And
Yeah.
the syllables, you use very few adjectives. They're very, lots of alliteration, black barriers, hanging on against blizzard breath. But the starkness of the language, again, it reminds me of your translations.
Well, that's definitely, yeah. It was inevitable that there would be a crossing over, and I hear it myself.
Because you were so compelled by the early
Right.
work.
Right.
And it's almost like the Pre-Raphaelites that were done with all the flowery whatever, and they went back to the
Yeah.
medieval times
Yeah.
to get more in touch without all the intermediary stuff going on. So I find this very much like that. But leaves are like paintings of blown leaves. That's a difficult line, actually.
Yes. I know. I worked on that line a long time.
Yeah, because you're reading about leaves, so you're indirectly experiencing them, and then you're talking about paintings of blown leaves.
Right.
So it's hard. That's what makes poetry, right?
Right.
Is you can't really, you can talk about it, but you have to talk around it.
Right.
You can't really.
Right.
You have to. There's a lot of space in between that you can sort of rest in, but yeah. So
Negative
I like that.
capability.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Yes.
John Keats.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's great. One more.
Okay. This one, everybody in Delaware County should understand this. It's called The Old Dog's Lament. And it's a persona piece. I was barking all the time when I was a pup. I couldn't get enough of the sound of my high vagabond voice, the parallel report from the ridge-scraped barn, glaciated pond. The turtle, even the heron, stopped to hear my song. I was a blithe boy. And those days spun out unbroken. Then I met the yellow bitch with the feral smell, exhorting voice. She and I, we became one beast, our fur commingling on the hill, mouths eating wind, feet in tandem. Even after, coming to see my sweet in that last place, splayed and spread where she found her end, I could barely suss her fur there, dead, grayed among last summer's sere stems. Her smell still lay heavy on the hay. I had jaw-dragged her after the tires bump and thud, listened as she whimpered her awful death. But I could not stop her going. No one has to tell me to cease my sorrow song. I carry her face behind my eyes, now and then lift my head at what I recollect. Her bark, joy-struck eyes, tail thrilling against our day's blue, blue skies.
That's very touching. The Old Dog's Lament by Bertha Rogers. Again, it's like bristle barbed. you have jaw dragged, sorrow song.
Yeah.
It's a great continuity here.
Thank you.
Bertha, tell me where we can, for those listeners who are interested in finding your work, where they may find it.
As far as my books, they can find them online on Amazon or on salmonpoetry.
Best of luck with the books. They're wonderful. They sit nicely in the hand, and they're beautiful on the eyes. Bertha Rogers, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you
pleasure.
so much.